I think at that time that was really the start of something or the restart of something. And it was an awareness about what was possible, especially for African American kids. And we had three very innovative, fearless teachers.
Yeah.
Was Donald Dustin, who, dealt
Yeah.
with primarily the orchestral area and all of that. Frank Harris, who handled the marching band primarily. They all overlapped, but that was his big thing, and that he brought that kind of authenticity to it. And then Reggie Andrews, who was the young one. And it was during Reggie's earliest days of becoming a teacher. So he brought into it the idea of what all the different kind of musical environments on a professional level look like.
Real quick, if you're new here, welcome to the TrevBeats Show. Make sure you subscribe if you want to stick around. And for the regulars, if you ever feel compelled to throw some extra support our way, check out the membership options next to the subscribe button. It's strictly for those who want to help us do more, but your viewership is supporting us, all we need. Now back to the show.
TrevBeats Show, TrevBeats Show. TrevBeats Show, TrevBeats Show.
Welcome back to another episode of the TrevBeats Show. Now today we have an absolute legend on the show, a true trailblazer, a master of the keys, and a legendary vocalist, composer, and producer. She is the genius behind timeless anthems like Forget Me Nots, Remind Me, and Haven't You Heard? Plus, of course, so much more. She was the first and only woman to serve as musical director for the Grammy Awards, the Emmys, and the NAACP Image Awards. She is a musician's musician, and her influence spans generations. Please welcome the iconic, incomparable Miss Patrice Rushen. Hey, how you doing, Patrice?
I'm doing what's up? Wow.
Yeah.
I love it.
I am so glad that you're able to do this. Just from being from LA, but also just a fan of the music, like truly a fan of music, and just all the moves you've done. It's just, especially when you're from LA, you really can feel the influence. But I have listeners and viewers all over the world, and I really can't wait to share kind of some of the stuff that I've known, but your story on how you became to be the genius you are. So thank you so much for coming.
Oh, it's really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yep. So, listen, I think there's something to be said also about an institution that you went through, and so many people, even to this day, have gone through that have influenced music, yet for another generation, and that is Alan Leroy Locke High School. Now,
Yeah.
Locke College Prep Academy. I mean, you went there, and Ndugu Chancellor went there. Tell us some of the other people from your generation that went there as well.
Yeah, Gerald Albright went
Wow.
there.
Wow.
Gary Bias and Reggie Young, who are playing with Earth, Wind, and Fire and have been there for 30 years. They went there.
Wow.
And some people that did other things, who were musicians, but with other things, like William Allen Young, who is an actor and played bass.
Wow.
And there were so many people that came through there. I think at that time that was really the start of something or the restart of something. And it was an awareness about what was possible, especially for African American kids. And we had three very innovative, fearless teachers.
Yeah.
Was Donald Dustin, who, dealt with primarily the orchestral area and all of that. Frank Harris, who handled the marching band primarily. They all overlapped, but that was his big thing, and that he brought that kind of authenticity to it. And then Reggie Andrews, who was the young one. And it was during Reggie's earliest days of becoming a teacher. So he brought into it the idea of what all the different kind of musical environments on a professional level look like. So we went to clubs, we went to studios and saw who the studio players or players, nameless, faceless, people that you wouldn't know who play on everything. Of course, people who were teaching music. We learned about all the different aspects of, arranging, and these were things that were brought into the mix for us to consider that it wasn't just about playing the instrument. There were all these other things that had to happen, and music was its foundation.
Yeah, Reggie, R.I.P. I mean, what a great guy. And so for those people that don't know, in these following generations at the same school, that's where you got the Bruner brothers. That's where Thundercat came from. That's where Terrace Martin came from. So, and so many other people. So this school and this institution. Now, let me also frame this too. This was in what they call South Central Los Angeles. So it wasn't in an affluent neighborhood. It definitely wasn't in Culver City like the school I went to, Hamilton was, which was basically a copy of what was going on at Locke. This was in a area that wasn't necessarily, that was definitely an underserved area. So, once again, it just proves that theory that some of the greatest talents come in these areas that don't have all this affluence. The creativity is just a whole nother level. And then you get people like yourself. So I'd imagine your classical foundation was that kind of introduced to you there. Is that where you kind of discovered that first part, which was classical piano, playing classical piano?
Well, actually, I was involved in when you talk about the area of Los Angeles, there's 6 years difference between my younger sister and I. So I was an only child
Mm-hmm.
for 5 years. And both my parents worked, so they put me in a nursery school program.
Mm-hmm.
And a teacher there in the nursery school who noticed that anytime we did any kind of activity like singing or dancing or moving around the music, that's when I would really come to life. And she told my parents about a program that happened to be going on at University of Southern California, USC. It was
Wow.
their preparatory department, and it was designed where they were studying early childhood development. So the kids in this class were from ages 3 to about 5. And she told my folks about it, and then they said, "Oh, okay." And they enrolled me in this program, this preparatory department. And I was in a special class called Eurythmics. And all we did was move around to music. It was a graduate course. The graduate students were studying these young kids. And are they hearing the same thing? Are they reacting to music the same thing? And in so doing, they gave names to the music. We had walking notes. And then if it moved faster, we had running notes and skipping notes. And these were the ways we identified what we were hearing so they could study if we were all hearing the same things, because we were only like 3 and 4 years old.
Wow.
So this class, though, I think set up a foundation of how music is a feeling. They were observing us, but we were just reacting to what we heard. And later on, they suggest you play an instrument. Piano was chosen for me. I mean, it was like, "You wanna play piano? Oh, okay." That type of thing. And then, I studied classical piano, and the teachers that I had were very open-minded. And one in particular, the one I had the longest, she used to say all the time that whatever it is that you're gonna play, when you do music, it needs to communicate something. So many times I would go to my lesson totally unprepared, and rather than scold me about the Mozart or Haydn I was supposed to be playing, she would say, "Well, what did you practice this week?" And I said, "Oh, I learned this Beatles tune, or I learned this Marvin Gaye song off the radio," and I would play that for her. And then she would so deftly take the idea of motifs and idea of rhythmic emphasis and stuff like that and relate it back to that Haydn or that Mozart. See, this is the same idea over here, and this is how they did it then, and this is what you picked up now. And so suddenly music started making sense, not just from the standpoint of playing it, but what it does to people, the sound, the frequencies, the ideas, and all of that. And that's where I got a lot of the foundational stuff, was studying piano, but studying piano as a vehicle to the music. And I was really lucky to have teachers who were that insightful.
Right.
That's
that first of all, the whole point that they had a program for children that young is just unbelievable, that they were recognizing that. And who knows what research that ended up even being the foundation for moving forward.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally. And find out later we were behind
Right.
because Japanese had the Suzuki method for violin. They had been doing that for years and years and years. So this was jumping on top of the idea of that early what you expose kids to early
Right.
and allow them to follow that innate ability or gift does work. And that
Right.
program still goes on. It's now at the Coburn Center now.
Wow. So somewhere between that age group and your teenage years, you kind of got the jazz bug. So how did that happen?
Well, you grow as I was growing up, my parents had the radio or a record player on all the time. It was music was a part of the environment. Their
Right.
music that they listened to, the pop and the jazz of their day.
Right.
So I heard all of this stuff just as part of the atmosphere going on. And, while I appreciated classical music, I didn't also see a lot of people who looked like me
Right.
doing that at time.
Yeah.
So I leaned in a little bit to the music that I was hearing, as I said, on the radio. And as I was growing up as a teenager, the music that I liked to dance to, that we played at parties. And it was at Locke, I think, that the idea of the landscape of contemporary music, you cannot escape jazz because that's like the foundational music of all of it. It leads you to all of these different things.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, we were exposed to so many different kinds of jobs and opportunities that the music area and the music arena involved. You just wanted to be really, really good. So
Wow.
that's where the jazz bug really took root, even though I had heard it all my life, at home. When you're studying it and it becomes part of the way you learn about your history, part of the way you learn social graces, part of the way you learn to be thankful and exposed to an art form where the people who were the proponents of it looked like you. That made a big difference.
Right. So you went on to go win a jazz competition at Monterey Jazz Festival, and you were still just a teenager then. So then at some point, this is the part that I'm very interested in myself in knowing, which is where was that switch over to now I'm going to be an artist, that's basically in the R&B field. I guess that's what you would have called it back then, right? The R&B category. So that's a big stretch most of the time for jazz people to switch into that other, what we call commercial world. So where was that bridge that made you say, you know what, I'm going to start making records and I'm going to go be an artist? Because you've given us some of the greatest records of that time period. And I personally can hear the jazz influence, but it's like, I'm just curious on who convinced you, or how did that part happen? Like, you can go be a huge R&B sensation artist too. How did that happen?
Well, I think back then we didn't necessarily, at least my generation didn't necessarily draw the distinction between what it meant to be a solo artist and what it meant to be an artist playing music. The differentiation for us wasn't about, ooh, I want to have a record deal. It was really about, I want to be so good that I could play with my heroes. I could play with this person. I could play with Miles. I could play with Michael Jackson. I could play with Frank Sinatra. I could play with da-da-da-da-da. We wanted to be so bad that we could play with anybody. We loved the music that much. And at that time, you're talking about a generation of people who grew up with Stevie Wonder and James Brown and Sly Stone, also with Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and who heard that music and that span of music that was all representative of a certain level of excellence.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a composer. I wanted to be a film composer. And when we played a lot of these contests, Quincy Jones, Oliver Nelson, Benny Golson, some of these people were actually adjudicators at some of these Battle of the Bands contests that the band used to do.
Wow.
And when they saw me mention Monterey, that was as a result of winning one of those kinds of competitions. The band didn't win, but there was a combo division we entered and I won.
Wow.
So having played there at Monterey, that's when the attention towards the possibility of a record deal and all of that came up. And I resisted it at first. I was like, no. I'm not ready for that. People know what they're doing. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I did need money to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to stay in Los Angeles. So I wanted to go to USC. And, I knew that they didn't have a jazz, they, just barely had a jazz program, but they didn't have any popular music or anything like that. And that was okay because I was going to be getting all this together to be a film composer. And I could
Right.
do the other thing, outside of school if I wanted to.
Wow.
That's where the record deal came from. And the first one was with Fantasy Records. And it was, like I said, it was initially a response to, I need some money for school.
Wow.
And it was a very, very modest deal. They allowed Reggie Andrews to produce the records. And they gave me a guy named Orrin Keep News. He said, you just do you. You just do whatever you want to do. So the first record, very, very straight ahead, what we expected to get from me. And I enjoyed doing. The next record, I experimented a little more. It's called Before the Dawn. And I experimented a little more with electronics and dealing with the Rhodes a lot, which had, kind of come into my existence and all of this kind of stuff. And then the third album probably is the one that is leaning in a little bit more to the idea that you could have a high artistic aesthetic and have a commercial sensibility and that the two could match. And I had already seen that. So when you asked me what was the cause of it, for me, the bridge was that I had already seen and heard how people could do that. I had seen George Dukes and Herbie Hancocks and Earth, Wind and Fire played my high school prom. So I had seen the whole situation of how this aesthetic could be involved with any kind of music.
Right.
And I wanted part of that, and it just was a kind of a natural progression. When I did get to Elektra Records, which was after my deal with Fantasy Prestige was over, they wanted more of the singing and more of the things that they felt were part of that awareness and that ability to have a certain kind of jazz sensibility, but it be able to be offered to a more commercial realm. So for me, that was right up my alley. That's didn't feel foreign to me at all.
Right.
And I was also in that time allowed to write strings, write for horns, and these are all the things I wanted to do.
Right.
So I could do those on my own projects, and it worked out.
Wow. So full circle. I mean, even doing the thing as a kid at USC, then going to USC, and then later we'll talk about, chairing the department for a decade at SC. I mean, so crazy. And we have so many similarities. Like, I'm from LA. I went to SC. I went to Monterey. It's just so crazy, but I mean, just framing what you just did, framing what the time period was, what the climate was. It's hard to imagine that, Train, Miles, all those other artists, everybody was alive. Everybody was current. Stevie, this was all the current stuff. You turn on the radio, these are the songs you're hearing of the day. Maybe some later Beatles and people that are still alive like Paul. It's just an amazing thing to even imagine that was the music, because I see the correlation between people like you that are just a whole nother level. But at the same time, for you, it was like, I got to keep up. This is what's going on. You know what I mean? So now we're fighting against computers now, and the aptitude has gone so low for a number of reasons, for, corporate reasons with labels signing things and the whole dumbed down and all these things. Now we're seeing 2-3 generations of that, and we're seeing where it's leading us. It's just an interesting dynamic, between when you were coming up and what's happening now. So I love to hear those backstories of how you got to, where you are. And I have to ask you about this just as a fan. One of the greatest bass lines of all time, Forgive Me Nots, right? Sampled through the roof. I mean, listen, all kind of, samples and people doing it over. What was that moment like? I mean, how did that happen? You know what I'm saying? What was that session like? You know what I mean?
Oh, well, basically, the session was just recreating what had started as a result of Freddie used to live with my family. When he first came from Oakland, he stayed. He stayed with us because he wanted to get into the studio thing.
Freddie Washington, Freddie Washington.
And that the bass line is totally him.
Right.
Totally him. If I had the initial impetus to know that was special, That would be the gift that I brought to the table, and then it developed from there. But in terms of that bass line, the idea of how that would flow, that was all Freddie.
Yeah.
And the idea of collaboration is just that spoke to me, and it spoke to Terry McFadden, who came up with the lyric concept,
Mm-hmm.
and then it evolved from that. But it evolved with something that was so special, and that was that bass line.
Yeah. I mean, you know, sometimes, and I've been fortunate to work with my brother, Focus, who's actually Bernard Edwards Jr., so his dad is responsible for some of the other greatest bass lines at the time. But that bass line is absolutely you got to put that with the Money, Money, Monies and the many bass lines from Cool. And, it's just one of the iconic parts of that time period of music. And, it's amazing. And, here it is. You've done that multiple times with stuff in your catalog that's been, essentially it's foundational DNA for hip hop and even modern R&B. It's been sampled by so many people, from Will Smith to George Michael to Mary J to Kurt Franklin doing, huge things as a, result of your song. In your mind as a composer, like when you hear someone else, copying your stuff or utilizing your stuff. I mean, aside from the financial part, we know that's great when they do that. But what goes through your mind as a composer when you hear all these generations later and they're still making your things, new and relevant time and time again? Like what goes through your head as a composer?
It is the highest compliment when anything that you do musically resonates beyond just the thing you've done with it.
Right.
That's it. There's something about the way that particular song or those particular songs continue to resonate with a certain part of the human spirit. And I don't know exactly how to put it into words or what it is, but there's a timeless element when it's coming from a place that is just the joy of the music making. And sometimes people find that and it sticks. And I'm very fortunate to have had, several of those songs, Forget Me Nots being one of them, that, 40 years plus after it was initially recorded, that, it still resonates and people are playing it or playing it, as it was. The interesting stuff about Forget Me Nots is that it almost didn't have that opportunity. Because the record company, when we turned it in, it's on an album called Straight from the Heart. It has a song called Number One, Remind Me is on there. Of course, Forget Me Nots is on there and several other things. And when we turned it in, the record company didn't hear anything. They didn't like it at all. They were like, well, we don't have a single, we don't have a this, we don't. And we were like, what? So, but the idea of what you're just saying, that also during the time, we became a little more conscious about the role that we play in our own success, and that we needed to know more about the business side. How does stuff get to radio? Because radio was that's how people found information then.
And we know how it really gets there.
We know now. But those were kinds of things that we had to know, and we had to have independent promotion to get it through the door. Now, once it got through the door, people took care of it, they loved it, and everything was beautiful. But the idea of having to do something so that it could get to the people was a new concept for us. But we definitely put that into place with Forgiveness.
You've been in so many situations, not only where you were, the head of things and controlled things, but in the 70s and 80s, you had to just shatter a lot of glass ceilings because of just the way things were male dominated, even on the producer side and the musical director side, right? So you've done some things that we don't really talk about that are not just musically related. It's just, you're the first woman to do certain things and the first woman to do this. And I don't think that gets enough attention because it's not easy. No matter how much talent you have, that's not easy. So what do you think is the skill that that you possessed to allow you to getting all these situations unobstructed, or at least get over the obstruction? Like, how does that work for all the ladies watching this that are trying to, navigate this business?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to bring to the table your best self and in a consistent way.
Mm.
Uh, that consistency and the ability to do it typically is noticed by other individuals who are looking for that. And when people need things, opportunity and need, when they meet, that's the big chance. And I had a few of those kinds of chances. And I had people also, primarily male, that treated me with a certain respect on the basis of what I could bring to the table.
Mm.
I think that was the biggest difference. Not behind my back, they may have been saying all kind of stuff, but it was time to play, or when it was an assignment where the music had to be a certain way or whatever. I wanted to and had developed the skill set to be really, really as good as I could possibly be towards being able to meet the goals.
Yeah.
And gradually, and it took time, but gradually that overshadowed my ability to do it, overshadowed whatever bias there may have been on the basis of being female or on the basis of being black or on the basis of being short or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the bias was dispelled with the level of skill and care
Mm-hmm.
that I would to do. And I used a lot of the people and techniques, that we developed together that I grew up with, people that I grew up with who also were striving for a certain kind of excellence.
Right.
And we pushed each other, and that helped too. But to the young women out there who are interested, it's about doing. It's
Yeah.
about not allowing what your dream is to be shattered by things that are irrelevant.
Mm.
And the music, and especially today, I think that the music skills, when you have skills, it shows up, and people admire that still.
Yeah. I mean, and staying on that subject, and this just even for anyone, male or female, like, that's listening to this, what, you've been a musical director for some huge productions, especially one of the most stressful things, which is television, which a lot of people don't know because it's so fast and there's so many moving parts and things are changing so much. So when you're managing a huge, massive, television broadcast or like an awards show that done so many, and with dozens of artists, what makes a great musical director in those situations? Because I mean, the plane obviously gets you in the door, but it has to be something else, right? So what skill do you really need to be successful in those type of situations?
That's a great question. It's a combination of things. I think that one of the things you should be is capable of understanding the big picture and then breaking it, that your part of it, breaking it down into actionable bites so that it comes together. And that's in everything. That's understanding the entirety of what the show is, what your role in the show, the music's role in the show is, breaking that down as to how you're going to deliver that part. And being organized really does help.
Yeah.
Also, I think that there's the skill set of knowing how to cast the players that you're going to need for what you're going to do. That has served me really, really well, to pay attention when I'm playing with other people as to what they sound like, how we work together, what their ideas are that they bring to the table, maybe in a situation that's not related. And then we try to, and remember who those players are that you were impressed with or that you heard or saw in a context, and try to cast correctly the people that are going to help you to deliver the direction that you have to have. And that's
Right.
the other part, that the skills that are required of a music director are very similar to those, I believe, that are required of what music producers used to be. Whereas the overseer of a concept and the ability to help to direct people to their best delivery of the thing you needed for the overall concept to come together.
Yeah.
Sometimes that means that you have to do some writing, like or arrangements or things like that. Other times it's to be able to assign arrangers particular things for the idea of the show that you're going to do. So it's like having that overview and then being able to put it into actionable steps and pull it off in time.
Right.
And I believe, and this is just a philosophy that has worked for me, is to empower the people that you have around you to give you their best. They don't have to always know everything about what's happening. You just need for them to do just this and empower them to be able to do their best because you know it's going to add up,
Right.
to the overall thing happening. So that's the other
Yeah.
thing. There's a certain amount of kindness, I think, that goes into it as well.
Yeah, that was there's a similarity there with our brother Michael White when he was on the show. He said that's how George Duke was. You know what I'm saying? That he really made people feel like, how that just made you want to do the best. That's how Herbie is too, same thing. So it's like you just feel like you want to just go give 100% all the time. Well, thank you for sharing that part because, it's no coincidence when you've done it so many times, there has to be a method and some reason why it keeps happening. It keeps happening. And sometimes people get caught up with thinking it's just about being the player. That's always only one side of the equation, especially, there's that old series called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And one of the things it says is the best CEOs know who to hire, and that's important, right? To get that infrastructure of people together that can make the whole thing be successful. And ultimately, you get credit for it because you put it together, but your whole goal is to make the event successful, right? So,
Exactly.
so that, thank you for sharing that. Now, here's one of my favorite things because you are a person that's been there from, the analog days. So let's talk about gear a little bit because
Okay.
you said on some of your earlier records, you started experimenting with electronics. So at that time, it was, Moogs perhaps and Clavs and that was coming on as the stuff from the day. So from that period, and I guess to around, when the drum machine started coming in, like maybe early to mid 80s, really started coming in. I mean, what's your philosophy on the gear? Because we can go from there to now. So like what's your
Mhm.
philosophy back then on how things were evolving?
Well, I think because I was trying to be a composer, having different uh, colors, different
Hmm.
tonalities, different ways in which you could create a certain mood or whatever, create a certain atmosphere. I really enjoyed, the experimentation that was going on with synthesizers. And I had seen already that the possibilities were endless. I mean, you're dealing with frequencies of sound, no matter what we're talking about. But
Right.
I also saw people go over to the other side of it, whereas it was to replace certain things. And, I'm sorry, the cat was already out of the bag. I had already felt what it felt like to play with people. I'd
Right.
already felt what it was like to sit in the middle of an orchestra and to feel that sound. I'd already
Right.
felt like what it was to be in a big band or to be in a motion picture studio where they were putting the music to the movie. I'd already felt that kind of thing, and I didn't necessarily feel that replacing people was the answer. When we had, different instruments that could very well replicate, certain kinds of uh, things. It doesn't
Hmm.
replicate. Doesn't
Right.
replicate. So for me, it has always been an added tool
Right.
that I could bring into my storytelling in terms of what I was doing with my songs or productions or whatever. And I experimented a lot with and in fact I did one album where the majority of the stuff I did, totally, at home. But still there was the idea of a mix that I always felt like a human element and so I experimented with that, having some of the things done, on synthesizers or with sequencers when they came in, and then being able to play on top of that to give it yet another dimension. So it's
Right.
always represented that for me.
Right.
Um, and still, I think that coming from a place of finding the right sound or the right tone that's gonna project the right feeling, it's more about that than, "Oh, there's a new thing, so I gotta use it."
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because that train, I mean, it's like, I mean,
Endless.
yeah, you hop on that train and you're gonna look up and it's gonna be a year and all you was doing was buying gear. You didn't even make any music. You know
That's
what
it.
I'm
That's
saying?
it.
So it's interesting because we've kind of seen this story before, right? But now it's a little bit more aggressive and it's a little bit more broad. So, obviously you were there from kind of the changeover of full analog to digital and then digital to DAWs and plugins and all that. But now where we are, none of that stuff could think for itself. So now we're in a whole different place. And for you specifically, it's a different conversation because you're on the other side of the training side, not necessarily that you want it to be, but your catalog's been around as such. So if they're scrubbing stuff, they're going to be scrubbing some Patrice Rushen. So there's two different sides. So what is your take on AI now? And we can just leave it in the music realm right now. What's your take on what's happening with AI right now in music?
Well, I think that AI, there are different aspects and different ways in which it can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
AI can be used, however, to be able to, for example, strip down tracks so people can hear exactly what was being played, exactly how it worked I can just hear the bass and just a kick drum of my favorite recording and learn something about that relationship. I can hear the exact guitar part and listen to, so I think in those ways, when you're looking to learn something, you have AI that gives you access to certain kinds of things because you have those kinds of tools.
Right.
But where it's getting a little bit precarious for me is that some of the ability to do that has suddenly been replaced with the idea of that you don't have to do the work to become a musician or to become an artist. The things that were a part of that journey that made it not only interesting, but fun and allowed you to find your creative self. Some of those things are being wiped away in a very subtle way with the consciousness of young people who want to play music.
Right.
It's like, well, you need to do the work, and I don't understand. Music is one of the few things that art. You're not going to escape the idea of what it is that allows you to feel a certain way about art, and then be able to understand and participate by doing it, studying with masters of it, and living that kind of experience so that it influences the art that you put out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's aspects of that AI is just not going to be able to do.
Right.
So what I'm hoping is that we, like in the case you mentioned, that we've gone to one extreme only to find it as a tool and find that middle ground. I'm hoping that before too long that AI can be seen as being that kind of tool and not, again, a replacement for songwriting, replacement for what it is that allows for us as human beings to feel something and be able to determine good, better, best.
Right.
It's becoming harder because the lines are blurred by, first of all, there's just so much stuff out there.
Yeah. Yep.
And back in, there was a time when, you had to be at a certain level of having something to say that people were interested enough to sign you to a label or whatever. Those days are gone now. And everybody has the same access. Same person who can do something for 30 seconds has the same access as somebody who's done it for 30 years. And there's something about that seems to not necessarily weigh in on from the standpoint of the work and the time and the effort that's put into becoming an artist, becoming some. And when I say artist, I'm saying it in the grand scheme of people who are using their musical talents to affect art. So that's everybody. That's not just a person that is signed to a label or not just a person that, has produced a big record. It's all of us.
Right.
Because we're all responsible.
You've been heavily involved in music education. You've been an ambassador. You were a chair at USC for, I want to say, over a decade at least, right? And, in that education space, was there any influence of AI? I know it's kind of at the tail end. It's just beginning now. And I know you recently made your departure from USC. But during the time you were there, did you see anything that was kind of pointing towards, there's getting ready to be a shift or a problem here? Like, what do you think about that?
Well, you could see and feel that a shift coming.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my focus and the time that I was there was to do the best that I could to maintain the idea that if you truly want to be an artist, there's unescapable things that you have to be willing to do.
Right.
And if I can maintain that and get the kids to do that and be able to, and they could see the result year after the program went like this, and they could see the result by doing this, I'll be able to do that. And then I can do this, and then I can do that. In other words, trying to build in them the idea of what music and music making could be about and focus with that, not
Right.
get too distracted by the other things that were being said or the other possibilities in terms of the way people were making music. And when they would become invested in understanding
Right.
the history, understanding and knowing repertoire. I don't know, I don't know when we got to, for your viewers, I was chair of the popular music program.
Right.
And in all music, when you learn to play repertoire. Well, how come all of a sudden in popular music, you just roll right out into a record deal? No. You're going to have to, if you really are looking for a career, you're going to need to know some things.
Right.
And they learned repertoire. They learned producers, writers, and, human beings learn things first by imitation. Then they assimilate. Then they innovate.
Mm.
You learned everything. Like you learned to walk like that. You learned to eat like that. You watched other people do the thing and you tried to do it like them. Then when you had that together, you tried to move around with it. When you were learning to walk one day, you saw people walking, you picked yourself up, you got on the edge of the table and you fell sometimes. And then one day you're upright. Then you move your feet faster. Oh, snap, I'm running. Or pick your feet up off the ground. Oh, this walking. And it all led from the walking thing, from watching people walk.
Yep.
Later, way later, after you learn how to assimilate everything that you do and you're walking great and running great and doing all of that, then somebody says, oh man, isn't that Trevor down the street? And you say, well, his back is to you. How can you tell? I can tell the way he's walking.
Mm.
You innovated your steps without even knowing because it came from something to something. And I think that the music was the same way. And I needed a platform, and I was given the idea of a curriculum that allowed for us to be able to have that kind of platform of imitate, assimilate, innovate.
Wow.
And if I could keep those 3 steps happening, then every class we would come out with people who were capable of being able to do music regardless of what was going to happen from the standpoint of AI's influence or whatever, that they had the same kind of access, to the spirit of the music that had been given to us that was part of our environment, that it is not necessarily part of theirs.
Wow. Interesting. That's really interesting. And it's so true. We're losing that, first of all, we're losing the paying dues phase. We're that's going away, right? There's not as many places to play. The proving grounds are going away. And we're losing that master teacher to student type of energy. Everybody wants to skip that phase. And now it's even to the point of, it's like so many the back door of so many things is run by computers. And now, we do have this AI revolution happening. So even within the AI revolution now, it's how do you trick the computer with the computer? Like now the whole thing is, how many automations can I make and how many things can I do where I absolutely don't have to do anything? You know what I mean? And it's interesting. It's just an interesting time that we're in. And I'm glad we're having this interview at this time because it's changing so rapidly. Who knows?
One of the things that I think is also key in this conversation is that the people who were supposed to protect or be a part of the protection of artists' rights and development in terms of creating music, that's who needs to really step up in terms of demanding that there be some kind of fairness and legislation, because the creation of what it is that AI studies and learns is not being paid for.
Right.
By the people who have created the things that AI learns to do. They're not getting any remuneration for their efforts.
Yeah.
And what does that do to publishing companies? What does that do to our performing rights companies when they are faced with having to look at what's real music and what's been generated by something else?
Right.
And so the dilemma, like you were alluding to, the dilemma goes way past, how we use AI. It's like in terms of our music, it's like, how do we have a career? How do we wanna be a musician?
Yeah.
How do we wanna because where is the payment for the skills that make us the artist that we wanna be?
Yeah, and I think that I've heard a few people share this, which is, some people think that, what we do, being a specialist is going to end up being more appreciated because it's going to be much more far-fetched and far removed, that people just won't even grow up seeing that and go, oh, wow, you can actually play drums, you can actually play the piano. Like, it's going to become even more valuable, some people seem to believe, because it's literally being stripped away. I mean, I love the tech side and all that, and I'm involved, but it's also very troubling, to see the next generation may not even have anywhere to really go see people play and learn like that, how we all had a chance to do. And you have that feeling of aspiration. You saw somebody and it was
Mhm.
so amazing. You're like, I'm gonna go practice for weeks because I want to be like that. And
Yeah.
now, it's numbers
Well, we don't
driven. Yeah,
totally number.
it's numbers driven. You might
I
see
mean, and
something great.
people don't wanna pay for when they do have access to something that's
Yeah.
in person.
Yep.
And when I say they don't wanna pay, it's really not that. I think that people will they're already paying a tremendous amount for tickets to people that they really wanna see.
Yeah.
The industry is not supporting it on the other end. They're not supporting it necessarily on the giving end. The taking end, yes. The giving end, no.
Right.
And, our performers, our songwriters, everybody, our musicians, everybody is in a particular place of like, I've heard kids say, "Well, I love it, but why would I wanna do that?
Right.
Work that hard to learn." In other words, the money, the financial aspect is one of it, and I think the spiritual aspect is a part of it too.
Right.
'Cause I didn't start playing and doing music thinking about the money I would make.
Mm.
I didn't start doing it on the basis of anything other than I loved it, and I wanted to get better at it, and I saw the possibilities of when you see people who are really good at it, they seemed really happy, and that's what I wanted to be. Happy
Yeah.
doing what I wanted to do. As I learned what part of it I really wanted, where my talents really were and really wanted to try to do stuff. But the money was not in the equation at the start, whereas today, that's the first question that comes up. How many followers? How many this? How many that? Because it
Crazy.
leads to money, and my worst nightmare would be have hundreds of thousands of followers and blah, 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 but I can't do the thing,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And, that would
Interesting.
be just horrifying, but a lot of that is driving some of the decisions, and as you are an educator as well, I know you see that when you
Yeah.
need people to practice. When our time, that was just part of it, and you did it every day whether you had a gig or not, that wasn't the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, that's true. And dealing with the other side of it, I still deal with, some of these companies and these things. And you,
Mhm.
and you see, before even there's music being listened to, it's a conversation about numbers and you know what I mean? Before anything happens, it's like, well, what are the numbers? What are the social media? What's this? Like, did you press play? You know what I mean? It's like, it's just an unbelievable shift in something that is a creative art form. It's really switching to another basis, and a very let's say successful person told me something that I never forgot. And they said, hey, listen, you want to find out what's behind something, take money out of it. Right. So if money
oh,
is the first question, we're not even in the right arena here. We're talking about music, but then we're talking about money. We can't be in the right frame of mind dealing with art when the first question is about money. And you and so many other people that I've interviewed and just read about and studied never had the money as the forefront. It was the byproduct from the work and the timing and the fact that it influenced people and it touched people, and then the money came. It wasn't, I'm going to do this for money, and we have to get back to that mindset, because if we don't, what we've been witnessing, in my opinion, for the last several years is predictive analysis music. Like, we're trying to figure out how to excite and cheat and fix an algorithm instead of how to touch people. You know what I mean? It's
Oh,
like
man. Well
it's
said, well said.
it's different. So listen, I'm so glad you shared your opinion on that. Now, on another note, I want to say congratulations, NEA Jazz Master class of 2026.
Thank you.
Alongside Carmen Lundy, Aerto, which is one of the great percussionists of history, and Rhonda Hamilton. That's awesome. Highest honor in jazz in America. So after all of those Grammys and Emmys and all the firsts and the people that have sampled you and all that kind of stuff, what does this NEA Jazz Master award mean to you? Because I know jazz is such a big part of your history.
Well, because it's the highest honor that jazz musicians are paid in this country, it is, I'm amazed, I'm honored, and I know that the long list of recipients are, heroes of mine and people that have really worked really hard to keep moving the music forward in the joy of what it is that they do.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited and very, happy to be now among those, considered to be among those people. And I've learned in observing, especially during these times, how what you were saying in terms of understanding the certain value and quality in what people do, that award is an accumulation of a lot of different things that I have done over the years, and so to be recognized is really fantastic.
Right.
But in looking at how it's going down this time, which is different from the way it usually happens, it lets you know that we've got a lot more to do to be able to understand when we celebrate something what it really represents. And in jazz, there's not a lot of people who are aware of this award.
Right.
Not me particularly, but the award in general, that the National Endowment of the Arts gives this award every year and has been doing it for some time. And the average person knows nothing about that.
Right. Not like
So
the Peabody or something. Yeah.
A part of what has to happen is that an awareness that allows for the music to kind of take a center stage on some of these big awards. And that's a part of what I think we have to do also, which hopefully would have some ripple effect to the things that we were just talking about in terms of the values that are being adjusted relative to AI.
Right.
It's very cool, and I'm very happy.
Yeah, well, it's well-deserved, of course. And one thing I will say positively that I have seen is, I can't remember the letter, but whichever generation is now around 17, that generation, I have seen an uptick in them supporting live music, being excited about live music, being excited about jazz, being mostly anti-AI music. Like, my daughter's 17, they're not into it. Like, they don't care. They want the old-fashioned way. They want to learn it the old-fashioned way. They want to write it. And I think that's positive. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think there'll be a comfortable medium, because that's always what happens. It's what happened with drum machines, what happened with sampling. We'll get to a place, and then it'll be, but even along this journey, I had to keep reminding people, it's like, you can still take it or leave it. You don't have to use it. You know what I'm saying? And I say, if you were dope before AI, you'll be dope after it. So for those of us that didn't have it and had a career before, it happened, just like having a career before social media happened, it's like, it's not gonna take that away. So I believe people should, just learn their craft, cultivate their craft. One of my last guests, David Shiverton, said, it makes a lot of sense. Cultivate the craft first, and all this other
I
stuff.
think that was to our advantage.
Yeah.
See, I didn't have the distractions. I don't know that if I had been born now.
Yeah.
And the
True.
curiosity, the same kind of curiosity would have maybe led me into a different direction, but we didn't have that. You wanted to
Yeah.
do music, here's the way you go about
Yep.
it.
Yep.
And the other things that were attractive, it was just about trying to be able to work as
Yeah.
a musician, and that was the big deal. Whereas now the big deal is all these other things, and I think that kinda takes away from the focus of the craft. So if we can just keep that messaging happening with the same fervor that the other message is happening, that yes, you don't have to use that, and this is why it is of value to AI, because it is valuable for people to know something, to
Yeah.
do and to be able to act on that knowledge in a way that is progressive and hits the human spirit, you know?
Yeah. Well, Patrice, listen, I mean, we could sit here forever and ever and ever.
Good.
You have so much information. One thing on the way out, I'd love for you to just give a gem, which is maybe something you took away from your time that you spent with Quincy Jones. You know what I mean? Like, what's something for the new generation, a lesson or something that, really can help this new generation that decided they wanted to do music, something that you learned from the master himself.
Mhm. The biggest things that I got from Quincy had to do, first of all, with the love of the music. And music making, it typically is with other people. So when he was writing with certain things in mind, and he knew that people were going to breathe life into what if he gave them an instruction, a lead through our code, which are the notes and things on the page, that they would bring themselves to it, and they would want to bring themselves to it. And I think the love of it and being able to be clear in what he wanted to say, clear in his language in his writing, clear in his language in his productions, clear in his goals for the different kinds of iterations of the musics, to all realize that they were coming branches of the same tree. I think those were things that I got from him the most. So you don't let categories stop you. You like it? Then do that and do it really good.
Yeah.
You want it? Then go for it and be about it. Go for it. And don't let little things stand in the way. And, one of the things that I'm sure that that I took away is that, one of the things he used to say was like, if somebody tells me no, that's all they have to tell me to get me started. And then I do it. So that influence also, I think, is there too. When rarely has there been a situation that I've been in where people say, well, you can't do that. And I go, oh, and then not go and try to do it.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's right. Well, Patrice, thank you so much for spending the time with us here today. So many people, this is going to touch a lot of people, and I love when people tell their story and you hear it from the source, because sometimes things get lost in translation. And I like the direct information from the source, because then it's not opinion. It's not because you read about it. It's because you lived it. And with you, you've affected so many of our lives through your music and the moves that you've made. It's an honor for me to have you here. I've been a fan so long. We haven't really played, I don't think, maybe.
Gotta do that. We gotta
It's
do
so
that.
crazy. It's just so crazy. I remember running into you in Ukraine, and by the way, for all my drummers out there, the other thing too that with you is you've always had such a strong drum chair associated with you through these periods. Rest in peace, the incredible Ndugu Chancellor, Sonny Emery, Rayford Griffin. I mean, just so many people, that are all just geniuses in their own right, have sat in that chair with you. So, that was also inspiration for me, coming up in LA, seeing that. And, it's funny. It'll happen one day, but, it's funny. But thank you so much for coming to the TrevBeats Show, ladies and gentlemen. This is Miss Patrice Rushen. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Yep.
Thank you.
All good. Okay, everybody. Appreciate you for rocking with us today. Share this episode with somebody in your circle who's on their musical journey. You never know who needs to hear this conversation. Like, comment, and subscribe. And also follow us on Instagram at Trevor Lawrence Jr. and stay locked in. I'm Trevor Lawrence Jr. It's the TrevBeats Show, and we out.
It's the TrevBeats Show, and we out. We out. We out. We out. It's the TrevBeats Show, and we out. TrevBeats.